This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome back. I'm going to actually mute all the participants so that we don't get disturbed. 1 second. Okay, today is really exciting because we are going to be beginning from the very beginning of Tanya, once again, back to basics. And since we have done, some of you have been here from the beginning, it's going to be a review, but it's also going to be a refresher. It's always good to learn things and become aware of them again and again. I know that every time I start Tanya from the beginning, I always become aware of new concepts and new learnings that I can apply to my life. So today is basically going to be an introduction and the first chapter of Tanya. I do want to say from the start, many of you have been here with me from the beginning. These classes are a overview of the prakim. This is not a text-based class. This is a summary of each parak. So it does not replace in-depth text-based learning, but it will give you, as some of you may know, a very good overview and of the subject matter of Tanya and the tools that the Alter Rebbe teaches us in Tanya as well. Okay, so why did the Alter Rebbe write Tanya? The Alter Rebbe took 20 years, in actual fact, to write the Tanya, in order to explain to us that the service of God, Avodas Hashem, is truly a practical and attainable goal. This is something that doesn't always seem so clear to us because very often we think, wow, this is so hard. Like these mitzvahs are really difficult to do. But the Alter Rebbe actually wrote the Tanya and based it on a pasuk that Moshe Rabbeinu told Bnei Yisrael, the nation of Israel, before his passing, which is the pasuk Ki karev elecha hadavar ma'od beficha ubilvavcha la'asaisei. The translation of this pasuk is, it is very near to you, this thing to do, beficha, in your mouth, in your heart, and in action. Now, in other words, Moshe Rabbeinu was passing along a message to the nation of Israel that this Torah that you are getting as a wonderful gift from Hashem, you don't have to do what it says in the Torah only by rote, but it can become a part of a person in a very real and practical and honest way. Torah is very relevant for us. And it is relevant bilvavcha in our emotions, in the way we express our godly soul, which we will come to later, in thought, speech, and action. But in other words, Tanya now will begin to address, Tanya addresses actually the dilemma that we all have of our actions being aligned with our values. In other words, sometimes we can think to ourselves, wow, my values are such and such, why don't I behave that way? Why is it that my values can be one thing and my actions contradictory to my values? And the way Tanya does this is through an awareness. Because if we are not aware, we don't actually have true free choice. Awareness is the precursor to choice. When one becomes aware of what goes on inside of us, in our godly soul, our animal soul, our thoughts, our speech, our feelings, our emotions, when we are more aware of what goes on, then we can truly make a choice of how to behave. Now, just before we actually get into the parak, into the first parak, I do want to point out that in the beginning of Tanya, when the Alter Rebbe introduces on the very, the Sharblat, the introductory page, the Alter Rebbe says that the way of Tanya, the way of explaining all these concepts, are b'derech arucha u'ktara, like the long, short way. Now, where does this phrase even come from? Where does this phrase come from, long, short way? What is that? So it goes back to a Gemara, an episode in the Gemara in Eruvin, where one of the Tanoim, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hanania, he tells a story, and he says that once in his life, a child got the better of him. How did the child get the better of him? He once saw a child sitting at the crossroads, and he asked the way to the city. And the child replied, Zu ktsara v'arucha. This is the short, long way. V'zu arucha ktsara. This is the long, short way. So he was puzzled. So he decided to take the one that started off with the short, long way. But soon he reached the city and found the entrance obstructed by orchards and gardens. So he went back and he asked the child, didn't you say katsara? Didn't you say it was a short way? And the child said, yes. I also answered arucha. I also answered that it's a long way. So he kissed him on the head and he said, Ashreichem Yisrael, you are praised, the nation of Israel, that you are also wise. And then he took the long, short way. In other words, when we say something is short, long, the distance may be short, but the path may be obstructed, obstacles, and you can't really enter the city. In other words, you can't achieve your goal. And when we say that something is arucha ktsara, it is long but short. The walking may be long, the distance may be long. You can't see the city so it doesn't seem attainable, but really when you reach the city, you'll realize it was a very short way and you can immediately enter. And this is the whole point of Tanya, to show us that we're not taking shortcuts, but we will get there. It is an attainable goal. Besides for this, there is a division in Tanya about the different techniques to actually reach a level of love of Hashem. And the Alter Rebbe does prescribe the long way and the short way of reaching this level as well. The short way would be to arouse the natural love that we all have, that we all inherited from our patriarch Avraham Avinu. And there are different techniques that the Alter Rebbe goes into how we do that. And the long way is actually by using our intellect and producing those emotions, and the Alter Rebbe actually gives us techniques for that as well. So to start off, now we're going to summarize the first parak, and again, it is a summary, it is not in depth, and it is not text-based. In this chapter, we are introduced to the central person of Tanya, the Beinoni, in addition also to the tzaddik and the rasha, and we have to define what all those mean. So today we're actually going to give definitions to quite a number of terms so that we understand what they mean moving forward in these classes and in Tanya. Now, usually the Alter Rebbe explains, when we use the terms tzaddik and rasha and Beinoni, we are actually referring to when a person is judged. On Rosh Hashanah, everyone is judged, and a tzaddik is one who has majority mitzvahs. A rasha is one who has majority aveiros, majority sins, and a Beinoni would be somebody who has half and half mitzvahs and half aveiros. The only problem with that is, says the Alter Rebbe, we see that there are not so many tzaddikim. The Hashem actually spread tzaddikim, righteous people, throughout generations, right? He didn't put them all into one generation. He spread them out through different generations. And we actually see with certain people who we would consider to be a tzaddik, like a very famous Tana in the Gemara called Rabbah called himself a Beinoni. So right off the bat, we see there's a problem with these terms. We may not be able to continue using the popular terms tzaddik rasha in their meaning that we use them when it comes to judgment on Rosh Hashanah. And we will see that the Alter Rebbe takes these terms, these titles, and uses them to explain the essence of the person. And not only the essence of the person, Tanya actually uses these terms to address your potential versus who you are right now. So again, to explain, we are going to be talking very many times about the tzaddik and the rasha and the Beinoni, right? We will realize, in fact, that the tzaddik is somebody who never sins. He has actually completely transformed his animal soul who we will be introducing shortly. The Rasha is somebody who may even do majority mitzvahs most of his time, but he has the possibility of sinning. And the Beinoni is someone who has an active animal soul, but has learned to control the expression of that animal soul. But don't worry if you didn't get that, because we're going to repeat that many, many times throughout the classes when we actually learn how the techniques and tools of Tanya work. But it's just important for us to realize that the terms tzaddik, Rasha, and Beinoni are not used by the Alter Rebbe in their usual way, but they are used in a way to describe, first of all, the potential of a person and not necessarily how many mitzvahs or averos they do. Some other terms that are necessary to understand before we move on. We have to understand what kedusha means. What is the term kedusha? The term kedusha means that we reveal godliness. Whatever is holy reveals godliness in this world. It's like the curtain is open. The opposite of kedusha is klipa. The literal translation of the words klipa is a shell. A shell is something that protects what is inside, right? But a shell also conceals. So klipa is something that we use this terminology to say that we are concealing godliness. But in klipa, there is now a third term that we need to understand. That is something called klipas noiga. Now, klipas noiga is something very interesting because it's not, if we are to refer to kedusha as an open curtain and klipa as an opaque closed curtain which completely hides godliness, klipas noiga is a translucent shell. In other words, we could see the light behind the klipa, but it's not so clear. It's not so clear. And it can be manipulated. Klipas noiga, that's the wonderful part about klipas noiga. It can be manipulated by our intentions. And we're going to learn what falls into this category of klipas noiga. And sneak peek, our animal soul comes from klipas noiga. So therefore, our animal soul can also be manipulated. What does it mean that we can manipulate it? It can either be elevated to the status of kedusha or demoted to the status of klipa, total concealment of Hashem. So now, the Alter Rebbe in this chapter introduces us actually to the concept that we have two souls. And he bases it on a pasuk in the Navi Yeshayahu, where the Navi Yeshayahu brings the phrase "Uneshamois asher asisi," Hashem created two souls, two life forces. One comes from kedusha, and one comes from klipa, and we're going to see how that actually works. Okay. So firstly, in this chapter, the Alter Rebbe explains the animal soul, and the next chapter we're going to go into the godly soul. But the animal soul is actually something very, very interesting and very, very important for us to become aware about or aware of, because once we become aware of how the animal soul behaves and what it makes us do, we can actually count on the cooperation of the animal soul and find ways for the animal soul to cooperate with us. So what is the animal soul? The animal soul gives life, physical life to the person, and is found within the blood of a person. The godly soul lives forever. So when a person passes away, his godly soul is still alive. The animal soul is what is removed from, or goes away from his body. So the animal soul is what gives us life. It is within our blood. It gives the nature of a person. Your personality, your innate personality, comes from the animal soul. Now, this does not mean we can not overcome our innate personality or overcome obstacles with our innate personality or change our innate personality, but the animal soul is what defines our innate personality. The good traits of a person, which are natural, such as Achmanis, pity, gemilas chasadim, the natural desire to do good for others. Also, the animal soul, fuels the negative traits of a person. Now, all traits of a person come from the four elements, which are fire, water, air, and earth. So when we say that the animal soul fuels the negative traits of a person, they're all based in these four elements. So, for example, negative traits such as anger and pride come from the element of fire. Pursuit of pleasure, which, by the way, is the nature of the animal soul. The animal soul avoids pain and pursues pleasure always. And that comes from the element of water. Scoffing, frivolity, idle talk comes from the element of air. And laziness and melancholy come from the element of earth, because earth is like heavy, right? Now, in a Jew, the animal soul originates not from complete klipa, but from a place called klipas noiga. Now, klipas noiga actually comes from a very interesting place as well. So let's go back in history a little bit to explain where it comes from and why it's this mixture of good and bad and why it can be manipulated. You see, when Adam and Chava, the very first people on earth, were created, the earth in which they were living was Gan Eden. It was complete revelation of godliness. They were living this idyllic existence where Hashem was completely revealed, and therefore they were in harmony with the will of Hashem. The moment that they sinned, what happened? There was a protective shell around this beautiful idyllic earth called a klippa, protecting the world, Gan Eden at that time, from negative forces, because Hashem created those negative forces. But there was a protection. The minute that Adam and Chava sinned in Gan Eden, that protective shell got smashed into pieces, broke, and scattered all over the world. So what happens is that now we have a situation in the world until today that there are pockets of klipa within this idyllic world. In fact, there's a lot of concealment of Hashem in this world, but there's also revelation of godliness in the world. In other words, the world did not become a complete concealment of godliness, but became what we call a ta'aruvos toivara, a mixture of good and bad. So this mixture of good and bad is where klipas noiga comes from. And that's why it can be manipulated. It can become good, kedusha, and it could become evil, klipa, depending on how we use it. And throughout Tanya, we're going to learn how to manipulate the origin of the animal soul, the klipas noiga, to not let the animal soul get demoted into complete klipa, but for the animal soul to be elevated into kedusha. In other words, the animal soul is not evil per se, even though it is sometimes identified as such. It is biological and therefore can sometimes fall into temptation. It's not essentially a thief or a liar, but sometimes expresses itself in that way in order to survive. The animal soul is always looking for ways to survive. But the animal soul can be refined, it can be educated, it can be elevated, and can even become an ally of the divine soul. And in fact, we do need the animal soul to become our ally, because the animal soul, as it's in the blood and in our body, we need the body's cooperation to do the mitzvahs. We actually express the will of the divine soul through our animal soul's expression in the body. You can't think about lighting Shabbos candles or think about giving tzedakah. You actually have to use your body, and your animal soul has to cooperate in order for you to do those mitzvahs. So Tanya, just to explain what's going to be going on in the future chapters in Tanya, First chapter, this chapter really describes who am I? Like what's my personality? My animal soul, right? The second chapter describes the godly soul, which comes from the essence of Hashem and the intellect of Hashem. The third chapter, we will learn the structure of the souls, which are the 10 attributes of Hashem, the spheres, the 10 spheres. And the fourth chapter, we will learn how the soul, the neshamas, both of them, how they express themselves through thought, speech, and action. So the first 4 chapters are very fundamental for us to learn who we are, how we express ourselves, how we express ourselves through our animal soul, how we can begin to express ourselves through our godly soul instead of our default setting, which is the animal soul. But just to actually also give an overview of what is going to come in the future prakim of Tanya, in the future chapters, from about chapter 1 to 9, the Alter Rebbe discusses the conflict between the animal soul and the godly soul, because we are always in conflict, and that is why we sometimes don't behave in line with our values. Like you think to yourself, you want to do something, but why are you not doing it? Because there's a conflict, an internal conflict going on. Chapters 10 to 34 describe the purpose of the conflict and of the struggle. Why do we need the struggle? Why does this conflict need to exist? Obviously, much more detailed, right? And chapters 35 to 53 are how to actually resolve this conflict and create harmony between the two souls. And in a nutshell, we will say that our nefesh elikis, our divine soul, is the vision, and our animal soul is the one that really implements the vision. So therefore, they really have to be conflict-free and in alignment with one another. And the only way we get to do that is through developing an awareness of how each of them behave. So the Alter Rebbe started off describing a little bit of the animal soul. Next chapter, we're going to be describing more of the godly soul, and so on and so forth. Those who have been with me up till now know that we're going to learn a lot of tools. We're going to make Tanya very, very practical and accessible to our personal lives. And that is my goal with this class, that people shouldn't think that Tanya is something abstract and not for me, but that is really, really practical and helpful in our daily lives and in the service of Hashem. So now I will open up if anyone wants to ask a question or clarify anything that I said. Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
Hannah,
Yes.
beautiful. Thank you. Good morning. When you were just describing chapter 1 is this, chapter 2 is that, 3, then you said the 4th chapter teaches us how to, and I couldn't write the rest. What'd you say?
So the 4th chapter talks about the expression of the soul, of the souls, which is actually called the garments of the soul. But the garments of the soul, the same way as when you get dressed, you express yourself in the morning, right? If you're having a bad day, you wear some kind of clothes, and a good day, you wear some other kind of clothing. So the soul also expresses itself through its garments, which are thought, speech, and action. That's the 4th chapter. This is just a sneak peek of like what's coming. Okay, does anyone else want to ask a question or make an observation? Or I like to ask people, what's your takeaway from today?
Yeah, I have a thought.
Go ahead, Mushki.
So like, just like you were saying, how when we get dressed in the morning, it's a way that we express how we're feeling that day in a way, you know, I think it's so powerful to think about that our thought, speech, and action is meant to express who we really are, and to be able to differentiate between what we feel like, which sometimes can be grumpy, but to know that that's not in a way our true self, right? So
Correct.
the balance between the real feelings of the Nefesh HaBahamis, but the true feelings, the true expression of the Nefesh HaElikos.
So you see, it's interesting what you say, because a lot of people will say your true self is your godly soul. Your true identity is your godly soul. And it's true. Your true self is your godly soul, but your true self is also your animal soul. And because your animal soul is your personality. So the challenge that Tanya presents to us is get our animal soul on board with the values of our godly soul. Not to deny our true selves, but to actually become in alignment with our true selves. And I'll explain to you something that says in the beginning of Kuntrus in Yonah Shel Teres HaChasidus. There's a Kuntrus that the Rebbe gave out. It's actually translated into English. I know some of the people in this class have been learning it separately. It's called On the Essence of Hasidus. That the whole goal of the study of Tanya, the study of Hasidus, is not to control who you are, but to change who you are. And the Alter Rebbe actually uses the expression not the Alter Rebbe, the Rebbe uses that expression there in that contrast, l'shanos teva midoisov, to change the nature of your midos, to actually change who you are, to become more in alignment with your nefesh elikos, with your godly soul. But not to say that that's not who you are. What happens in Tanya is that you develop an awareness. You say, wow, this is coming from my animal soul. Do I want to be behaving like this? Do I want to be thinking like this? Do I want to be speaking like this? How do I get my animal soul on board with my godly soul and in harmony and in alignment with my godly soul so that I am at peace? Because when the animal soul and godly soul are constantly in conflict, we don't have that peace. We don't have that peace. And you see, this is the mistake a lot of people make about the Beinoni and Tanya. The Beinoni and Tanya is the most unconflicted person, because the difference between, and I probably should have said this earlier, but the difference between the tzaddik, the Beinoni, and the Rasha, and we will get to this later on, right? The tzaddik does not have a yetzer hara. He does not have an animal soul. He's completely godly, right? Yes, he is flesh and blood, but he's transformed that. It's complete transformation. There's no desire or understanding of evil even, right? The Beinoni, he has an understanding of evil, but he is absolutely not tempted in any way or conflicted in any way, because he's worked on himself to such a point that yes, there will arise certain involuntary emotions from his animal soul, and we'll speak about that later, where the animal soul is situated, etc. But he just pushes them away right away. It's like, I've given this example before. It's like, let's say you take 3 different people walking past like an exorbitantly expensive jewelry store, like Cartier, or like a pocketbook store, or Louis Vuitton, right? So if a Russia walks past that store, he will start scheming and saying, ooh, how could I get that jewelry? Should I rob a bank? Should I rob the store? His thoughts are going to start like elaborating the evil, right? A tzaddik doesn't even notice the jewelry store, just walks right on by, right? The Beinoni, in this example, will walk past the jewelry store, notice it, know that it's completely not his reality, so he has no conflict. In other words, if I would walk past a jewelry store selling a piece of jewelry for $40,000, I'm not even tempted, because that's not in my reality, right? So it's like, oh yes, there are people who like this kind of stuff, walk on by, right? That's the Beinoni. He's not conflicted, but his animal soul knows that there is something to that. His animal soul understands the sinning, the desire for temptation, the desire for sin. And we're going to go into this. As we go into Tanya, we're going to go into this more detailed, because this shows up time and time and time again in our daily lives. The point of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe wrote Tanya, is for us to be a Beinoni. Now, while we are not yet there, perhaps, because a Beinoni from the outside looks like a tzaddik, looks completely like a tzaddik. He does not sin in thought, speech, and action. In other words, the expression of his soul is completely in alignment with his, the expression of his animal soul is in alignment with his godly soul. So he doesn't sin, not even in thought, because the thought is fleeting and he pushes it away, right? But whereas we may get discouraged and say, well, that's just too hard, I can't be a Benoni, right? We can train ourselves to have what I like to call Benoni moments. And the more and more and more we have those Benoni moments and train our animal soul to get in alignment with our Nefesh Elokis, the more we're going to have those moments, and the faster we're going to get into alignment, and the faster we're going to get towards our goal of actually being a Benoni. So I'm sorry if that was a very long monologue, Mushki, and I hope that answered your question or
I
observation.
love hearing you speak, so thank you.
Okay. Anybody else want to say something? Okay. So I'm
new
gonna,
here.
yes, go ahead.
I just want to know how it works, how much you cover each time, how much time, like, just,
Okay,
someone
so
just introduced me to the classes today. I
okay,
missed the beginning, yeah.
sure, I'm always going to post a recording. As I said in the beginning, I'm trying a new method of recording, which is through a Fathom note taker, which means you're going to get also notes as well as like a summary. And I will also post it onto YouTube. But the way it works is that usually it's weekly at 9:30 a.m. New York time for half an hour. Sometimes the discussion goes on afterwards as well. But I generally try to keep it to a half an hour. It is not an in-depth Tanya class, but we will definitely learn the concepts thoroughly of Tanya. It's not text-based, but I keep to a parak each week. That being said, do not let your Yetzer Hara deter you if you miss a class. If you miss a class, just pick it up the next time. Each class of Tanya is a standalone class, even though it is a continuation from the class before, but it was also a standalone class. Don't let that discourage you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, everybody. So I'm going to end the recording.